I want you to get together.
Would you guys like me to discuss more? Is there a particular part of this you would like me to theorize about or speculate on, or maybe there's a part of it I've not quite considered? Now, of course, I, like most other Christians, have already considered all of the theories that go against this idea. I have gone through the motions through my own theological journey, and I've also understood the idea that tribulation is unfolding and we are not in the post-millennial kingdom. And for a long time, I was also in that camp, also looking for the signs of revelations to unfold, so I've been there. So it's not useful for you to then send me messages telling me why I'm wrong about the post-millennial thing and why we still need to see all these signs happening before Jesus returns. Because this is the thing, I'm kind of, we're trying to get past that right now and consider in all seriousness the concept that maybe that has come and gone. And, I've postulated that many of these signs you're waiting for would have already happened and become buried in history if it was true. So I know this is relatively wild speculation, but there is precedence to consider this angle. Okay, so I am, for thought experiment purposes, and not as an authority, but as somebody who's just thinking about the situation, I am thinking about this situation. Okay, and I am considering all logical reasonings and outcomes that could make sense of this if it is true. And also to make sense of the lengths that must have been pursued to hide it. Because this would have been no easy task to hide the existence of Jesus Christ ruling for 1,000 years on earth. And a lot of things I hear people talking about is, well, it's not an earthly kingdom that you should be looking for. Jesus rules from heaven. I've heard the argument so that we are currently in the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Then I've also heard the argument that 1 day is 1,000 years to the Lord. So we are in the millennial reign indefinitely, permanently, for an extremely long time, and it's not relevant to us as well. Um, but still, we need to make sense of these buildings everywhere that do not add up to the capabilities of the peoples we're told who built them. I mean, the complexity of some of these structures baffles the mind. It's mind-boggling, okay? And it's hard to believe that people with, horse and carriages and rope pulleys and perhaps some metallurgy behind them to create some kind of things to pull rocks could create such things in such short amount of time as they claim they were built, and even tear them down in such a short time afterwards. If you look at some of the historical photos of some of the buildings that are now gone, which were built and then within 20 years destroyed. This also doesn't make any sense when you look at these buildings because they are beautiful and they are intense and would have been extremely labor intensive, if possible, if it was even possible for them to do it with their tools and their capabilities. So these things do have to be understood and answered at the end of the day. And one common thing I'm always hearing all the time is, oh, those buildings were from before the flood during the time of Noah. And, I thought I was stretching time a little bit to try and fit this in, with the extra 1,000 years added, or perhaps 1,000 years ignored and called something else like the Dark Ages rather than what it truly was, which is an age of truth and light ruled by the Son of God, But to believe that these structures survived that long, so that, we're talking about the flood of Noah, what, 4 to 5,000 years ago? These buildings were around before the flood of Noah? I mean, that is an outrageous theory. And I feel like that is their way to stretch as much as they can to explain away the possibility that the Millennial Kingdom has already happened. Because it always follows with, oh, those buildings must have been built by evil pagans during the time of Noah, and what Jesus is still about to return, we're still in tribulation, And it's kind of like, oh, have you just thought about what you said there? these buildings are 4,000 years old. I don't think so, because we can actually go and look at these buildings today that still exist, and they have decayed, you know. They're not permanent structures that can last for such a large amount of time. I mean, maybe structures like the pyramids, for example, and these ancient, far more clearly ancient megalithic structures with stones so huge it baffles the mind to consider how any human was capable of moving these such a long time ago under any circumstance with such a bizarre stonework design, like they're melted into each other with razor thin gaps between the stones, almost non-existent gaps, you know. The accuracy involved and the work involved to build these far ancient, enormous megalithic structures. Yes, I can believe they were probably built a long time ago before the flood of Noah, because they look like they've been through a flood. They are destroyed, they are battered, they are weathered. The pyramids are just crumbling, but they still stand today, but they are a mess. So anything that was before the flood would look equally as battered as these buildings. Like I said, anything, you know, these Tartarian buildings, as we call them, or the Millennial Reign buildings, they should look equally as battered as the pyramids, should they not? You know, as all the megalithic structures on the earth, they should look equally as decrepit and weathered, you know, but they don't. A lot of these old world buildings, for lack of a better phrase, still look pretty pristine. They look in pretty good shape, you know. Like they were built a long time ago, yes, but not that long ago. You know, not quite that long ago. And the masonry is very good, very very intricate and well put together, and you know, sturdy. Yes, so they have lasted a long time. But they look old. They do look like they've had some weathering to them, yes, you know, and they've gone through time. But they don't look as old and weathered as the really, really, really ancient structures that were likely before the flood. You know, in fact, the worst things these buildings appear to have gone through is they have sunk a little bit, maybe a couple of meters. And this is where the mud flood idea comes into it. There's plenty of evidence to show that these particular buildings that have this particular stamp on them, this strange mark of design and structure and intricacy, appear to be either a few feet to a few meters slightly under the ground, you know, as though liquefaction of the ground made them just sink, or a flood of mud somehow buried them a little bit, but nothing like a full flood that would have decimated everything and ripped the bricks away, and just the torrents, the force of, imagine if the earth was encased in water, okay, you know, like the biblical flood would have been. Could you imagine the forces and the pressures under that water, and the torrents and the streams, the jet streams that would have formed, that would have been pulling buildings and just churning them apart like a blender, you know what I mean? The super forces that would have just torn apart simple buildings and skyscrapers and things like that, you know? And that doesn't seem to have happened. But what they do seem to have gone through is some kind of bizarre, slight minor inconvenience of being buried a little bit, which again is strange, because you don't build these type of buildings slightly underground, like these windows that are partially underground, you know, that peek up to the horizon, you know, to the walking level, to the street below. It's kind of like, why would you build like that? Why would you lay your foundations like that? In such a way. And these aren't necessarily like basement rooms that we're talking about. These are levels to the building that just happen to be slightly underground. And then there's a basement below them. You know what I mean? So it's bizarre. It's just so bizarre. And these evidences all around us that our history is a lie. Something happened that we're not being told, or has been covered up in some way. And there has been this timeline created, this chronology, we'll call it, which we have just taken for granted as the truth, which was formed by perhaps less than reputable characters, you know. And we have to question, like, I think it was a Calvinist actually. People say it was a Jesuit who came up with our timeline that we follow today. It's kind of the main timeline that's been universally agreed upon by historians, they say. I think it was a Calvinist, not a Jesuit, who came up with it when I looked into it. And I don't know his name offhand right now, but I will have to get it up. But there's something suspicious about it. Why this chronology in particular, you know? And there have been attempts at making new chronologies. You know, Anatoly Fomenko is a good example of this, you know, who has basically said, you know, a lot of these characters throughout history appear to be the same. though they're equated to being within different locations on Earth and different time periods, but they essentially did the same things, just geographically different, according to the way they were described. And it's implying they're talking about the same character, but what we've done with our chronology is turned them into two separate people throughout history and made up and try to form a coherent narrative around that misinterpretation. Do you get what I mean? And we've just gone with what we best understand. And sure, we have archaeological evidence to say that there were time periods with certain people that existed at some point. But carbon dating techniques, dendrochronology, I think it's called, where you look at the rings on trees and things like this. At best, they're highly questionable, and when you look into the tree situation as well, that just makes things even more weird. It really does, because there aren't that many old trees on Earth. Now, there are trees, yes, that you can find that maybe are 1,000 years old, 2,000 years old. Some claim to be 5 to 6,000 years old. But when you get to that level and you look at these trees that are supposedly that old, they are practically dead. There's no leaves growing on them anymore. They are weathered, decayed, decrepit. They look like they've been battered, perhaps by a flood of some kind. They are a husk of their former selves. And I've even seen examples of straight up tree stumps that have been cut down and destroyed and have turned to rubble already, being used as examples of really old trees. It's like, that's not a tree that's living. You can't claim that's you can't use that as an example. It's cheating. Where are the really old, great, huge, enormous trees that have lived and continued on? Where are they? And there aren't that many. Relatively speaking, the norm is that most of the Earth's forestry is quite young. So that has to be taken into account too. That's bizarre. That's strange. Okay, and this is what I'm saying. Sure, you can make the arguments that, well, we should have seen this happen, we should have seen that happen, we haven't seen these prophecies being fulfilled yet. It would have been obvious if Armageddon had happened, all this type of stuff. And because we haven't seen any of this yet, and because Israel has been made into a state which was prophesied to happen, then we must be in this specific point in tribulations, and Christ is just about to return. And it's kind of like, okay, sure, so you have your precedents for that train of thought, which is, okay, so Israel has been created in the 40s, so that means, we must be at this point right now. Fair enough, but then how do you explain all these strange anomalies with everything else I've just described? Where does that fit into it? Could it be possible that this Israel you talk about, that's been created as a nation today in the specific geographical location, is smoke and mirrors, and it's not really the one discussed in Revelations? They're just trying to make it look like that. Could the answer be that simple? And the aim is to make you continuously believe Jesus is about to return. This is conspiratorial speculation here. I'm spitballing a narrative to try and justify this concept or how it would work here. So they're spinning a narrative to make it seem like Revelations is coming to pass. So when that thing does turn up, which will call itself Jesus, people will be expecting it and will have followed the signs perfectly by the script. So they are certain they are correct that this truly is the Messiah come back to rule on earth, and we now get to reign with him for 1,000 years. Okay, so they can make it look like that's happening. Let's say if you control enough resources, have enough wealth, control the media, control the direction of people's attentions, and you have infinite resources at your disposal, then you could probably make it look like a convincing Revelations, tribulation, end time event is happening. You probably could make it look like that, couldn't you? So what does turn up if it's not Jesus? It's probably a deceiver of some kind, isn't it? It's probably going to be something posing to be like Christ. And as I was just discussing with my recent guest about the history of Gnosticism and how all pervasive and parasitic it truly is, and how it does seem to be, from my own research, this is the New Age religion for the New World Order, and it's Christian-ish. You understand? And I believe this world teacher, as Helena Blavatsky would have described it, after the process of the externalization of the hierarchy, where everyone is prepared for the world savior to arrive and has been prepped with the Gnostic worldview of Christ consciousness expansion and the rest, And it's all about doing the inner work rather than understanding doctrine for what it is and understanding that we need a savior, a personal savior outside of ourselves. If people are prepped for that, then when this world teacher does turn up, it could sound Christian enough to convince enough people that it is Christ come to return to rule for 1,000 years. But really, it's this pernicious twist using Christian symbols and words to promote the New World Order agenda and the New World religion, the one world religion that will bring all religions together. They were all just talking about humanity doing the inner work to become Christs themselves. And this Jesus, so-called, will say, my true message was to make you all become just like me. And I'm here now to teach that message once more and help you all ascend to be gods. You know? And that sounds millennial reign-ish, but it's not. It's a twist that appeals to the pride within us, and it's a Gnostic, parasitic lie. So again, running with this thought experiment, um, you know, narrative I'm spinning here, just to hash it out, you know. Could that being then convince everybody to join forces as one and become of one mind, of one culture, of one language, of one currency, of one religion, of one thought, maybe even through transhumanist means? Maybe that's the technology they use to promise you can reach Christ consciousness, merge with AI and technology and computers and become like us, that type of thing. Could they spin it that way and work it that way? Who knows? I'm just spitballing, trying to add everything that we see around us in modern society into this narrative. And then could he convince then if there's suddenly an attack on Earth from bad people, and could they say that's Satan? Satan's come to attack us all. He's come to it's his final stand. He's been released, and this is it. He's gathered an army to attack us. And the camp of saints is the earth. It's all of us together in our new one world togetherness, after maybe a couple of 100 years of peace and rulership with his false leader. He'll say, Satan's just been released for his little season and he wants to make war with us. Let's all come together and attack him and take him down first. It could spin something like that. So it sounds Christianish. That sounds revelation-y, doesn't it? That's what was said in the thing. But what if it's all just a lie and an inversion? What if Jesus already ruled for 1,000 years a long time ago, and this false savior who's turned up after a false tribulation event was orchestrated by this false leader who turned up? What if he's convinced his new army to go and circle the camp of saints, as truly predicted in Revelations, and he convinces the whole earth to go to war with the saints and Jesus? What if it's a double blind? What if this is what's really going on? What if that is the conspiracy? People like to speculate in the conspiracy world about big ideas and the consequences of believing those big ideas. Flat Earth was a huge thing. Okay, so if the Earth flat, what does this mean? If that is so, then A, B, and C. And the thought experiment of the flat Earth or enclosed Earth system came out with, well, that would mean there was a God, there was a creator, we are bigger than we think we are. And the deceptions used against us are enormous. So I'm doing the same thing with this. Okay, so if Millennial Kingdom has come and gone, then what? So if the Millennial Reign has come and gone, then A, B, and C. And these are the ABCs I'm trying to tell you right now. This is what is probably going on if that's the true narrative. Now, I'm not telling you to believe me and to say, okay, yeah, so Paul definitely believes that the millennial reign has come and gone, therefore I'm going to follow his word. This isn't church. I'm not an authority in anything. I'm a guy who has thoughts, who is speaking them out loud. And, as a man of faith, I believe I need to speculate about all possible possibilities and their inevitable outcomes, so I'm not deceived when whatever happens, happens. Another thing that might be worth mentioning that I've heard quite a lot recently, well, I've heard someone mention recently, which was clever. I'm always talking about, so if this is a little season and Satan's gathering his armies, then he's going to get everyone to go really far north to the broad plains and, northern Siberia, northern Russia, northern Canada, and surround that camp of saints in the center of the earth, which would be the Rupus Negra, the black rock of the North Pole, or not necessarily geographical North Pole, but magnetic North Pole, the one that's moving, the one that perhaps is a floating city, maybe where the camp of saints perhaps could be. This is all theory and speculation, of course. I don't know specifically because I've not been there, but I always say, oh, so he's going to get this army, he's going to get us all to march north to encircle the camp of saints. But then I realized, if this is a spiritual battle, no one would have to march anywhere, because if he is in the North Pole, he's already encircled by all of humanity who's against him. No one would have to move, because if the whole earth gets deceived and is aligned with this one world doctrine and the New World Order run by the false Messiah, then already everyone surrounding the camp of saints is his enemy. And then maybe he wouldn't make war with the camp of saints isn't a physical war. Maybe making war with the camp of saints is just simply being against Jesus Christ, the true Jesus, but instead aligning yourself with this false Messiah that came and claimed to be Jesus. If you've done that, then spiritually speaking, you've chosen the wrong side, and you're now an enemy of God and Christ, and you've made yourself an enemy of God and Christ, giving way to itching ears, doctrines that make you feel good rather than the truth, And maybe that's how the fire coming down from heaven thing at the very, very, very end happens, and how people will not see it coming. Because think about this: if it says in Revelations, Satan gathers an army and makes them encircle the camp of saints to make war with them, and then fire comes down and destroys them all, how is he going to convince everybody to go to this place when it clearly says in the book, fire's going to rain down from heaven when you do that and you're all going to die? Like, it'd be hard pressed to convince people to do that, because then people will go, hang on, didn't it say Satan would make us all gather around something circular and make us fight, and then we all die? Wait a minute, is this leader not really Jesus? People would ask questions pretty quickly. But what if nobody saw it coming, because nobody had to actually march on anything? Once the whole world is deceived and the whole world is under the system created by this false Jesus, then fire would probably come down from heaven, because the entire camp of saints is then fully encircled by his enemies. Because everybody in that time during the short season picked the wrong side, Who knows? Maybe there'll be people during that season who have to live through it knowing it's Satan's season and do not give up their faith and endure till the end. There'll always be those people, I'm sure. It'd be hard pressed to convince the entire population of the earth. It would be extremely hard pressed. Unless there was a huge depopulation event which wiped out 8.5 billion people and left it under about 500 million perpetually. And then maybe that's not many people to deceive. Maybe that will be easier. We know there's agendas for depopulation around. We know they've written about it in their books, and they even put it in stone for a short while in Georgia, didn't they? So who knows? Who knows? There's many agendas at play here. Perhaps many factions who are trying to do it their way. I don't know, but there's something spiritual behind all of this. Definitely, there's So this is what I'm saying. I'm not saying all these things because I want to shake people's theology or faith necessarily. I'm speculating on these ideas because I don't want people to be surprised when things start to happen. Because things maybe are about to happen. And you might see on the screen right here, for example, these are from like the 20s, the 1920s, the 1940s, perhaps, when these photos were taken. And you see men walking around with the end is nigh signs. And it's like, you think about that concept. It's like, what does that actually mean? The end is nigh? I mean, if these people are Christians, surely they should have signs saying things like, the beginning is nigh. Jesus is about to return. Don't worry, guys. Because when Jesus returns, that's not the end. That's not what the book says. Really, it's the beginning of his reign. It's a good thing. Only Jesus' enemies would worry about the end being nigh, wouldn't they? Would worry so much about Jesus returning that they would consider it an apocalyptic event. So another realm of speculation. What if these people who had these signs were probably people who had this type of belief I'm talking about here? What if they genuinely believe, no, the literal end is about to happen, and a new heaven and earth is about to be created. Final great white throne judgment is about to happen. The literal end is nigh. The end, not Jesus coming in 1,000 years and then the end. He means no, we're at the end of all that. The end is nigh. What if that's what they were actually trying to get at, and just that got lost in history, that idea, that concept, that translation of what they were actually trying to say? What if that was the case? If someone has any insight into what these people were about or what type of movement they were a part of more than I know, let me know. I've not looked into it yet specifically to check what the historical record says about people who wore these type of signs, but just food for thought.
I want you to get together